Interested in making pens out of wood? Watch this video for a quick overview on how it's done. Start by measuring the piece of wood against the size of the pen tube you have. Then you're going to cut it to length. Now we're going to mark an X on the end of the piece of wood to identify the center of the piece of wood so we can drill a hole into it. Drill a hole in the piece of wood all the way through. Sometimes you have to move the wood piece up to finish drilling all the way through it. And now we're going to glue the pen tube inside of the blank. We do a test fit first. Now we like to use a thick CA glue here. You can also use an epoxy if you prefer. Now we're going to sand the ends down to get most of the wood off, but we're not going to quite sand it to the tube. We don't want to touch the tube yet with the sander. Now here's where we're going to do the fine sanding. We're using a pen jig to really square those ends up perfectly, and we're just going to touch the end of the brass tube. So when you see the tube it gets shiny, that means you've hit it with the sandpaper and you're done. Next, you're going to mount it on your lathe. You're going to follow the instructions that came with the pen kit, using the bushings that came with the pen kit. Get your lathe tightened and all set. Get the tool rest in place. Start the lathe up and you're ready to start carving. Here we are starting with a roughing chisel, getting all the corners knocked off the wood and getting it into a nice round shape. Once we get the blank fully rounded, we like to switch to a spindle gouge. Other people like different tools for turning pens, and it's kind of just whatever you get comfortable with, but this is what we found works pretty well. As you turn the wood smaller and smaller and get closer to the size of the bushings that you want for the finished product, you got to be really careful and kind of slow down and take your time. We like to get pretty close to the bushing size, probably about the thickness of a credit card above the bushing size in most cases. And then we switch to sanding here, where we start with a 150 grit, and then we work our way to higher grits to a 240 to a 320, and we end at a 600 grit sandpaper. As we sand, we're putting a very light pressure on the piece, and in between grits we stop the lathe and manually sand left and right with the grain of the wood to remove those radial scratches that you'd otherwise get, and we do this between each grit. When we're all done and we're at a 600 grit finish sanding, we like to take some IPA, rubbing alcohol basically, put a little bit on a towel, and this helps us get all of the fine dust particles off of the piece of wood, and then we wipe it down with a clean dry one, let it spin for a minute so it can dry off, make sure everything's okay. Now it's time to apply the CA glue finish, which gives a nice, clear, shiny, reflective polish on it. And we do anywhere from 5 to 8 coats on this, depending on the wood and the pen that we're doing. We're applying it very quickly, just a drop, and then we're going to spray some CA accelerator on here, which almost instantly cures the glue to make it ready for a second and third coat. We do this accelerator between each coat. Once we get all of our coats of CA finish on there, now we have to do some wet sanding. We use these little micro abrasive pads, and we start at the first one, which is about a 1500 grit, and work our way all the way down to about a 12,000 grit, which takes about 4 pads. When all of the wet sanding is done, we go through and put a wax finish on it first. Very easy, it's a hard stick of wax. You just rub it along the blank here as it's spinning, very light pressure. And then we buff it with a blue shop towel. The final step for the tube here, the blank, is that we're going to put this high gloss polish on it. It's a liquid polish. Start with your lathe on a slow speed so it doesn't splatter, and then work it in. And as you do, you can increase the speed of the lathe. The blank is all done, so now we remove it from the lathe, being careful not to shoot the little bushings all over the shop floor. Take it over to our pen assembly area, and we like to sand gently the bottoms of each tube. We want to get these, nice and square and clean. Sometimes they have a little CA left on the ends of them. So here we are using the pen press to push the various components of the pen kit into the tubes that we just created. You want to be careful here, go slow, take your time. The last thing you want to do is ruin your pen at this stage because you're rushing it. We always do test fits. It's easier to keep pushing the parts of the pen together, but it's much more difficult to take them back apart if you push things in too far. We test every pen out to make sure it works fine. This pen is clearly a little more advanced than your average pen. It has 3 different types of wood, a mango, a koa, and a maple. In that cap alone, it has those 3 as well. The bottom half is just mango wood. And here we're going to put the 2 pieces together, and we want to line them up the best we can to make it look the most presentable it can be. And there's your final pen. That's it, you're done. We hope you enjoyed this brief overview on how to make a wooden pen. Subscribe to our channel, as we're going to have a bunch more videos coming out with more detail on all types of pens you can make.